Well, good morning, everyone. I want to thank you for being here and making it to our first session of the Kayak Conference. That's the Kentucky Young Adult and Children's Services throughout the state of Kentucky in public libraries. My name is Amy Olson, and I am your youth services consultant and also assistant and pseudo MC as we go through this day. We are very, very fortunate to have Antonio Garcia with us today. He is an associate professor at UK in the College of Social Work, and he's also faculty associate at the Center of Trauma in Children. He's done a slew of research, and he's presenting much of his most recent research with us today. He encourages questions and interactions from y'all. I'll be watching the chat and gathering questions for him. And he'll also explain some more information to you to give you some background and place the setting for you on what's coming your way. Dr. Garcia capitalizes on his research and practice experience to educate the next generation of social workers. So he's helping the helpers become better helpers. So we're very, very thankful for him being here. And social workers have many of the same mandates that we do in public libraries. And if you're not already working with your local social workers, I encourage you to dig in and track them down or contact me and I'll help you find them. I'm going to pass the mic over to Antonio, and you guys are in for a treat. So thank you for being here with us, Antonio, and sharing your wisdom and experience with us.
Well, thank you so much, Amy, for this invitation to join you this morning. Again, welcome. My name is Antonio, and it's great to be here. I welcome any questions or comments along the way. I want this to be as interactive as possible. I'm currently on faculty in the College of Social Work at UK. Prior to getting into academia, I worked on the ground responding to reports of abuse and neglect. And so I had to go through and do thorough investigations into whether or not abuse actually occurred. And through that experience, I realized that my hands were tied in so many cases. I was really trying to implement solutions that really required deep structural issues that prevented me from actually delivering the most effective services holistically. And the further I got into this work, I realized that many of our kids of color are more likely to remain in these systems with little to no support. And so that has sort of propelled me into this work around equity, diversity, and making sure that all kids and families have equal access to resources and services. A little over 2 years ago, I met Dr. Maria Cahill in the information sciences here at UK. And she invited me to join a project that involved exploring librarians' experience offering virtual story time, particularly during the COVID pandemic. And I thought, wow, that this is an amazing opportunity for me to look into more prevention and to look into how are trying to serve families and children and promote literacy, promote education, in hopes of looking to see whether or not, at least for me, whether these services are enough to really prevent, risk factors that do lead to system involvement. So this was a great opportunity for me to really join a project that I think is of value, and to learn more about what services are needed in the community. So without further ado, I just want to go over briefly. If I can get to the next slide here. There we go. What I'm hoping to achieve. First of all, I just hope that, by the end of this presentation that you have a better sense of what types of barriers fathers experience in trying to access services, particularly library services and virtual online services. And I stress fathers because in recent work, I've learned that fathers are excluded from service programming in child welfare, juvenile justice, education, and the like. And a lot of my research over the past 2 decades is really focused on, mothers, caregivers, foster parents, the voices of youth. But what's really been absent is the voice of fathers. And so I actually got funding through RWJ to address that gap. It was at that time that we thought, wow, we should really start to interview fathers about their experiences in interacting with libraries, librarians, and community-based services. So my hope is to give you a better sense of just the essential role that fathers play in children's development, and then really assess how you, in your role and capacity, could better support fathers in actualizing their goals in promoting well-being through libraries and other community-based services. So as I mentioned, I just want to give credit where credit is due. As I mentioned, part of this effort was funded by Dr. Maria Cahill's project through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. This overarching project was to basically understand how do public library virtual storytime programs meet the needs of all young kids and their caregivers. And so we did observations of storytime programs, interviews with librarians, surveys with caregivers and kids, surveys of library directors. So again, really trying to get a very holistic picture of what's happening behind the scenes in library services, particularly as they offered virtual story time during the pandemic. And then my project was funded by the RWJ Interdisciplinary Research Leaders Program. So it's a 3-year study looking really at the role that fathers play in children's lives, and taking a real deep dive into whether or not the systems that they are involved in are father-focused and father-centric, and the types of barriers that they experience. So in that project, we interviewed a number of service providers representing different systems, from education to child welfare, probation, criminal justice, support enforcement, and the like. So again, wide gamut of systems involved, and we again wanted to interview providers about their capacity to even deliver father-centric healing practices. At the same time, we interviewed fathers who had just completed a 24/7 dad parenting curriculum to understand their experiences with that program, but then to also think more structurally about their perceptions of the systems that they were involved in. And really, we wanted to use this data to develop a curriculum, a training curriculum on how providers across systems can really engage authentically with fathers, as much as they do with mothers. So those are the two sort of funding arms that sort of contribute to this project. And so we sort of morphed those two projects to understand how fathers then engage in pro-social behaviors, and how the extent to which they actually interact with their kids reading, the extent to which they actually engage in library services with their kids, and in other community-based services. But before I sort of delve into sort of the pro-social behaviors and the library experiences, I want to just give a little very brief background and target population, again, fathers in this case. So as you can see here, these are the stats that sort of lay out sort of the picture of father absence. And as you can see, over 7 million kids are absent from their minor kids in our country. And this is unfortunate because we know that when fathers are involved, when they play a healthy role in their kids' lives, kids benefit across the board. We see better educational outcomes, better health outcomes, better mental health outcomes, reduced infant mortality. We see less CPS contact. We see less neglect. This is established with over 40 plus years of research. So part of our project, as we knowing sort of the barriers that they face, and trying to actualize child well-being, what fathers have typically told us is that they want to be involved, and but the systems that they're involved with are not structured in a way that supports them in that process. And their main premise is to leave a legacy, fix their wrongdoings, and amend the past by actually playing a positive role in their kids' lives. So that's the fathers we spoke with talked a lot about, again, leaving this legacy and healing so that they in turn can promote well-being. But again, as I mentioned, they're faced with a number of structural limitations. There's pervasive racial inequities within the criminal justice system. Our CPS systems often do not invite fathers to the table in case planning. The school systems often refer or engage with the mothers when it comes to developing educational plans and so forth. And again, just racism that's really pervasive across all these systems. And then these are just some quotes that we pulled from fathers during these interviews. And again, it speaks to the structure and the issues. And sort of a common theme that we saw is that they were fully aware of their past missteps, their substance misuse, their own traumas. But the one thing they really asked for was not to judge them based upon their past mistakes. Look at them now for what they're trying to do and their attempts to heal and their attempts to re-engage with their kids. So that was the big takeaway there from them. I also want to underscore that as we're talking about fathers, we need to really pay attention to the experiences of BIPOC fathers. As I mentioned, they're more likely to be incarcerated, and there's many of our kids of color with fathers who are in prison. And they're more likely then to grow up in father-absent settings or within fractured family structures. So obviously, if you don't have a father in the home, they can't equally engage with their kids in reading and library services and the like. And this quote sort of speaks to that. I think sometimes you can see the sentencing, and it's just crazy how white people are treated so much better in the justice system. I mean, that's a pretty known fact that obviously, again, it's just as a society in general, things have to change. It's heartbreaking. And then what was really unique about this fatherhood project is that there were so many really moving quotes that supported all of the themes that I've sort of discussed already. Pages and pages of quotes. And I thought, fathers, community stakeholders, and service providers are not going to go through and read literally thousands of pages. So I wanted to find a way to get the message out there in a more accessible way. And so I contracted with a poet. Her name's Farrah Tucker. She's a trained social worker, creative artist. And she took those quotes and translated them into poetry. And what we sort of came out with here was essentially 11 poems that reflect the father's experiences and 2 that reflect the provider's experiences. And I'd like to... I guess not going to let me play here, but this is just an example of one of them that represents the fathers. It's called In the Aftermath of My Absence. Questions will haunt my child like they haunted me. Sleepless nights spent wondering why we weren't sticking around for. When fathers fail, children take the blame, decide they're undeserving of better. When fathers fall, we never fall alone. We tumble like dominoes, knocking down those who follow. A cascade of casualties left in our wake. My child will breathe my burdens into his bones until they merge with his own. My city, my country, my people will suffer, indigestion from swallowing the stories of our sacrifice and bear the weight of our mistakes. but give us the tools and all will be transformed by our triumphs. Again, these verses speak so eloquently to the themes that we observed in our interviews with fathers. This trauma, worrying about their kids, isolation, fractured families, fractured cities, fractured communities, but then hope as well. Hope that all will be transformed if they're given the tools and the resources to do so. So that's just a little background about the Fatherhood Project. And like I said, I had a great opportunity to collaborate with Dr. Maria Cahill and her team on this project, again, exploring, really trying to understand what happens behind the scenes in the libraries and trying to deliver virtual story time. And through that project, we realized again that fathers' voices, fathers' experiences with the library and interacting with their kids to promote educational well-being and literacy is absent. I mean, it's just, there's no research, there's no work sort of being done in this area. And so it was a great opportunity to sort of merge these two fields of work, or bodies of work. So again, in terms of background, as I mentioned, father absence remains a public health concern, but again, no research has really explored the perceptions of public libraries, educational enrichment activities, or the extent to which they engage with their kids as fathers, or as they participate in these and other community-based activities. So again, we're really trying to address a huge gap here and really trying to understand how fathers interact with their kids in the context of their educational community-based services and virtual story times. And so we wanted to, at least from the experiences of fathers, gain their thoughts on the challenges of engaging activities and how libraries can better enhance or support fathers and families to basically support their kids. So you guys with me so far? I know I've went through a lot of information so far. Any questions? I just want to pause for a moment real quick. We're good? Okay. So we walked into this work acknowledging that kids are nested within different systems. Kids don't live in a bubble. Their actions, their behaviors, their outcomes are influenced by these multiple intersecting contexts: family, the macro systems, the mesosystems, the larger systems, schools, child welfare, juvenile justice, and so forth. And so as we approach this work, we really want to take into consideration that, that kids are impacted by all the systems, including libraries. And what happens within those libraries can have a direct impact on kids and fathers and families. So for this phase project, I collaborated with David Cozart, and he is for 20 plus years was trained, basically has been a champion for fatherhood. He's trained in ministry. He's an absolute gem in a community and a community leader in this work. And he has access to, all those connections across different systems. And he was the one responsible for recruiting all those providers and fathers that we were able to speak with. I had the honor to speak with for the Fatherhood Project that I mentioned. And so I drew upon his connections for this phase of the study. And through that, I realized that many of the fathers that I actually interviewed for this phase, I had actually interviewed before. And it was just nice to see their progression and sort of get a better sense of how they have grown as fathers to get involved in this capacity. So out of that, we walked away with 12 different interviews with fathers. They had kids ranging between the ages of 4 to 17 years of age, primarily Caucasian. 6 of them had experienced homelessness in the past. 9 of those fathers reported a history of incarceration. And 5 of them were in recovery or recently released from inpatient substance misuse treatment. So again, these fathers, I just want to underscore, had multiple system involvement, dealing with different systems, dealing with different requirements and programs to help them hopefully heal and be in a place where they can parent effectively. So after all those interviews, I went through and read them all very closely. I coded them, and I tried to, as best as I could, to group patterns together that made sense. And out of that came 4 different themes. And I'll just briefly go over the first theme here. There was a lot of emphasis on the extent to which they participate in library resources. So from fathers' perspectives, they access this library resources an average of 68 times per year. And their main reasons was to access Wi-Fi, gain academic support for their kids, participate in reading time, and to attend guest events like art projects and reading events and so forth. In terms of barriers, they mentioned that oftentimes they just go to the bookstore or go to online resources, and they felt that those resources sort of decreased the need for any sort of library use. Others commented on the fact that they're either too crowded or too small with limited resources. But they also talked about positive perceptions. Some talked about the fact that they were aware that their library is expanding, it's growing, and they're remodeling and creating new spaces. And they were really looking forward to getting involved once those renovations were completed or are completed. And then for fathers themselves, they actually used the library for career sessions and as a sort of information hub. It's sort of, to get referrals for other services in the community. And then in terms of COVID-19, usage varied. A lot of people just stopped going to the library just because it was shut down, even after they stopped going. For others, it actually increased since libraries opened up again after COVID. So just a lot of variation in terms of what they actually did. And the reasons, to stay connected, if they chose to go to the library after COVID, was to stay connected to a community. There was a lot of talk around just being with other fathers, being with other families, with other kids. And so just that in-person interaction, I guess, was really salient for them. And a lot of them even commented on the fact, that libraries, I'm quoting here, just don't have much use during a pandemic, and that they're shut down just because of that value of in-person interaction. And then theme 2 talked a lot about their perceptions and experience of reading time. So this is really drilling down on how fathers, or the extent to which fathers, engage in reading time with their kids. For many of them, they wish that their kids would read more. They overall thought that they read to their kids quite often. Of course, as kids aged, that reading time decreased. But by and large, for those younger kids, under the age of 6, they really tried to read to their kids for at least 5 minutes per day. And very few, like I said, noted little to no reading. If they said no reading, it was because they lacked custody, or their kids were older, in this case, teenagers. And they also talked a lot about just the utility of books versus virtual story time. And they thought having the books on hand created more, actually led to increased academic achievement, higher morality, and just imagination. So again, going back to sort of that in-person value again. Theme 3 focused on technology. And I'll say this, the responses here were varied across the board. But I'll first say that they've seen an increase in social media use, especially as kids age and get older. The types of technology they use, educational apps, ABC Mouse for young kids, gaming, laptops, all increased. Some even said that technology use ranged from 2 to 5 hours per day, and most fathers noted that that's a huge concern for them. It's too much to be on their screens and laptops. But they also noticed that for older teens, they have to be on their laptops to do their homework. But despite all that, they noted that some deep concerns about social media content. Some noted it interfered with human engagement, and others noted it's challenging to regulate their use of technology. Others, however, disagreed and thought it actually led to increased academic improvement, that they had the ability to track their whereabouts and gave them access to music and opportunities to discover hobbies. And then, like I said, through all that, just really, a lot of difficulty about how to monitor the regulation on technology. Some even, limited frequency based upon whether or not they did chores or they got good grades. So they use technology as a way to reward their kids. And then the last theme focused on, again, the pros and cons of online pedagogy. So as I mentioned, there's a little contradiction here. Some fathers observe poor behavior at different moments. Some, again, noted that, some poor behavior while at school in person. Others noted it upticked while learning online. And I would say a good third of them noticed that transition from home to online learning, that huge, quick transition, sparked a lot of negative behaviors and interactions. And like I said, the biggest sort of drawback of online pedagogy, remote interaction, is just not seeing friends, that loss of social connection. So based upon that, they actually provided some recommendations on how libraries can better support fathers in communities. So there's some recommendations that focus on the library context, and for children, they really underscored, the need for libraries to start offering more tutoring services, after-school care, more referral resources. A couple of them brought up the idea of incentivizing libraries or incentivizing patrons, so children in this case, for reading, extra credit at school, for example. And a lot of parents, again, talked about transportation barriers. Could there be times when, the library could, coordinate with other resources to arrange transportation? Others thought about free subscriptions to educational programs. For fathers in particular, they talked a lot about how the library can support them personally. Some suggested, Bible study, post-drug addiction transitions, AA meetings, virtual robotic classes, ESL classes, parenting classes, GED classes, employment seeking support, resources for homelessness, and of course, a lot of them said that they use it for printing and copying. So again, as I mentioned, these fathers have a history, and they've been through trauma, they've been through all these systems, and they started to wonder, how can the library, be of use to them? And these were some, like I said, some of the services that they sort of suggested that could help them through their recovery and through that transition of really trying to re-engage with their kids in communities. Some noted some resources that should be continued. For example, the Lexington Humanities Program Storytime Program. Some appreciated online educational video subscriptions. And then they offered some other recommendations, including offering weekend programming. For many of these fathers, they have to go to treatment, they have full-time jobs. How can they participate in reading time during lunchtime or morning time to engage with their kids in this manner? So they suggested later opening hours, offering story time on the weekends, offering resources virtually, and getting kids interested in outdoor or hands-on activities. So again, lots of great ideas. Whether or not it's feasible, that remains to be seen, of course. But again, this is, again, what fathers are asking for. They also talked a lot about the community context. How can the library bolster community programs? A lot of them talked about hosting events or programs and increasing awareness of library and community programs through advertising. So thinking of the library as an advertising hub, putting up flyers or handouts, or doing more to advertise things online on websites, they thought would be great ideas. And then linking the library to other initiatives. How can a library link with Big Brother, Big Sister and other schools to provide assistance in making sure that kids have school supplies? How can they link with schools to offer field trips and reading programs? And how can they link with other programs to provide mentorship and support to fathers and families and kids? So again, it's about linkage, it's about community, it's about collaboration. And they really saw the library as a potential hub for that to happen. So on the advocacy end, they were really aware of the fact that we, as a society, we need to increase public awareness of kid-friendly activities and spaces, and the library can be a big one, essentially can be sort of the hub for that. And then a lot of them noticed that there's gaps for teens, so for kids, for 12 to 18-year-olds. There's so much sort of attention on, the 2 to 5-year-old range, and a lot of services or a lot of libraries don't offer services for those older kids, despite some interest there. There was some talk around needing to allocate resources in rural communities. And then one person, and I thought this was interesting, is just noting some ambivalence about increasing tax dollars to support all of these efforts. So, of course, sort of that dichotomy of, do I want to shell out funds for this, for tax dollars to support all this, or is this really important enough to get all these things off the ground and running? So that's essentially what I have for today. Again, this is I don't want to say groundbreaking, but it's just new research that has not been done, and I really opened my eyes to really hear from fathers in terms of what they think about libraries and what they think they should offer, and how libraries can better support communities in actualizing and promoting child well-being. So it's really interesting to hear their narratives, and these were just some of the major themes that they came about in some recommendations. So again, I welcome any and all questions, comments, and I hope this was helpful.
Antonio, did they happen to make any suggestions as to how we can communicate better with them through social media? We find there's not one specific location, and the minute we, as far as teens go, the minute we find where they are, they disappear to somewhere else.
Yes.
If you could talk about that, that would be helpful to us, because there's just not one place anymore.
Yeah. You're right, and that's sort of the complexity of social media. But a lot of them talked about engaging with schools. So, can the library folks give, a 5-minute spiel about the library to students, across different schools, or, and then during that time, educate them in terms of where they can find information, or can they send flyers home with, for parents to look at? So it's just a way of sort of, how can you get information out there where kids will be and where parents are involved, and just making that announcement in terms of where they can find further information. Because you're right. I mean, a lot of the fathers said, "Gosh, I wish I knew that this program was happening, or this event was going on at the library." And then they'll hear about it from some other parent about some event that happened in the past in which they had gone. So, like I said, it's about thinking about where kids and families go, and then can the library meet them where they're at. Yeah, and I'd say, to fathers, at least fathers that I spoke to, the question of whether or not social media is the best way, that's open for interpretation because, like I said, some of these fathers have been in jail for quite some time and may not be social media literate. So it's like I said, meeting fathers where they're at. And the best way, like I said, is to go to events in the community where fathers and families will be, or go to their schools and talk to superintendents about any opportunity to give like a 5-10 minute spiel about the library and what you guys do and how you can better support students. Um, so those kinds of things I think could be bolstered. Any other questions or comments?
You had mentioned programs for teens.
Mm-hmm.
Was there something that the fathers were specifically interested in, or a certain angle? Was it a more generic response?
Yeah, it was a more generic response. And when I asked them, for ideas, they didn't even know.
Yeah.
But one thing was very, very clear: support for homework, tutoring, and I'm trying to think incentives for actually reading. So for older teens, to get them get their foot in the door and start reading more and getting off their social media. So incentives could be, ranging from, extra credit at school, if the school will allow it, or prizes or sort of, just I would say the best approach would be again to connect with those schools, because of all the collaborations that I heard through this was this notion of library and school, and again, that makes sense because the library and the schools represent education, represent literacy. So how can they partner to really actualize the promotion of literacy and educational outcomes for youth? So any tips on how to get into jails to talk to incarcerated parents? That gets tricky just because of the bureaucracy. I mean, and I've actually had some initial meetings with folks in terms of how I could even go about interviewing fathers just one time. And there's a whole, you have to go through background checks, you have to go through clearances. It could take months, even years, to get through all that bureaucracy. But one way to get around this is to connect with, again, I guess this would involve mothers and relatives, but connect with anyone within the child's ecosystem that is privy to what the father may want or prefer. I know it's always best to go to the source, but at least asking questions about, during any sort of, interview or meeting with a family member or parent is to, ask, well, what about the father? What do you think he would think about XYZ? Just asking that question about, what sort of helps, at least on some level, bring in some father-centric thinking. I do think there is a lot of work to be done once fathers are released from prison. So if you like I said, if you can't get inside that bureaucracy, right? And I can see there's tons of challenges to that. There's a ton of work to be done once they're released, and as they try to immerse themselves back into their respective communities and in their kids' lives. And how can we better support fathers, to play a role in being, pro-social and really trying to increase reading time with their kids, and encouraging library usage and things like that. So, getting another question here. Has anyone tried connecting with fathers to the CPS or family court system, much like with the schools, having materials for a 5-minute elevator speech? So that is a very interesting question. My background is, of course, in CPS, in the court system. So yeah, I think the same thing. I think all these systems need to be aware of what the library offers and what they can do. In going through, just thinking about the sort of CPS work, we have to write these treatment and service provision plans. And I can't think, at least right now, of any plans, as consult on cases, I can't think of any cases that really even mention library or reading time in there. So putting a plug in, I guess doing presentations at different systems like CPS to say, hey, can you think about, suggesting to, parents or caregivers or foster parents, ways to promote youth well-being, and in particular, suggesting interactions with the library. So that's definitely a way to go about it, because like I said, each of them have to have a service plan, and why not include library literacy education in that plan? Any other questions or comments? I know the CPS people were interested in our program calendars. We have emailed them when we had weeded books, and that was something that they were interested in. So yes, I will say that a lot of CPS workers and child welfare workers are really interested in not just safety, but really promoting well-being holistically. And any resources that they can, learn about or get a hold of makes their job easier. Amy, yes, please, if you have any connections with local CPS people, that would be great. I would love to bridge that gap. And I think there's really some cost-effective ways that we could go about doing that. So. Any other questions or comments? Well, I hope this was helpful, and give you at least some food for thought, at the very least.
Yeah, this was just great. Thank you so much for hearing all of this. I know too that if you all are brainstorming and thinking of ideas, Antonio's been a gem to work with. I highly recommend just, continuing building those partnerships. And if you find just a stellar partner, reach out and let people know. It only helps everybody. So I'd encourage you to do that. Just thank you, Antonio. That was just a delight and just incredibly thought-provoking, and lots of meat there for us to chew on. Yeah, Antonio just put his email again for us. Just
feel free to email with questions, or if you have ideas for collaboration, I'm open ears. So just again, it was a pleasure for me.
Yep. Sounds lovely. Thank you again for all the time you put into this, and thank you everyone who's attended. Go stretch, choose your next sessions. Each room has a different link, but room 1 has its individual link. 2 and 3. There's some outstanding sessions coming up at 11 o'clock, so enjoy the break. And thank you all for attending. And Antonio, I don't know if you're seeing it, but you're getting lots of thanks. So
thank you all.
We deeply appreciate and setting the bar extremely high for the rest of the conference. So thank you so much. And
Thank you.
I'll definitely be harassing you again.
Perfect. Look forward to
I
it.
see
All right,
there's
bye.
you gave us some good places to collaborate.
Right.
So thank you so much.
Thank you again. Take care.
All right.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.